let's set our own password for this instance. Now, with my password set, I'm in a clean instance with nothing configured and all ready to go. The first housekeeping things I like to do with the new instance is go under Action and hit Remove Demo Data. ServiceNow includes a bunch of fake users and projects and policies. To give you an example data set, I like to remove them so things stay cleaner in your dev instance. The next step we need to do is create a mid server and a mid user to access this server. So in ServiceNow, if I head to the users table and hit new user, I'm going to create a user called mid user to keep things simple. This is the user that's going to run the actual mid server inside of ServiceNow. After I've created the user, I'm going to go back to this user, mid user, and I'm going to click on edit roles. There is a built-in role called MidServer that will give this user rights to execute MidServer functions. So under collection, we can type in mid, select MidServer, bring it over to the roles list, and hit save. Now that I have my user in place, I can build my actual MidServer. For MidServer, it can be on Linux or Windows. For this example, I'm going to use a CentOS 7 VM. Over in Calm, I'm going to order myself a VM from my marketplace to install my MidServer. After a few minutes, my MidServer VM will be up and I can SSH to this VM and pull down the package and install the MidServer. The MidServer is what allows Nutanix Calm to interface with the ServiceNow SaaS instance over the internet. So now that I have my VM, I will SSH into my Linux VM. Following the ServiceNow documentation, the first step is going to be to create a folder for ServiceNow at /ServiceNow/ the name of the server /agent. I'm also going to adjust the permissions on this folder to allow the local Nutanix user full rights over this folder. Back in my ServiceNow instance, if we search for MidServer inside the tables, we can find the downloads for the actual MidServer bits. So I'm going to copy the link for the Linux 64-bit MidServer and then pull those bits down to my VM. After I pull the bits down, I'm going to extract the zip file and then copy it to the directory we created in the prior step. Once it's moved into directory, the first step is to edit the config file to point it to our ServiceNow instance. So I'm going to bring up a Vim session to our config.xml. Inside the config.xml, there's 3 parameters we need to change. First parameter is going to be the URL of your instance. So we can just pop over and pull in the name of our instance. The next parameter is going to be the mid instance username and password. That's the username and password we created on the prior step. And last, the host name of the actual mid server that we've built. Now, with the file saved, we can start the mid server by executing a shell script. If the mid server started correctly, Now we can run the install script to make sure that the start script runs on every boot. Great. So now our MidServer is running successfully. Over in ServiceNow, if we head to the list of MidServers, we can see our newly created MidServer showing up in the ServiceNow configuration. Now, before we can use this MidServer for our Nutanix Calm plugin, it needs to be validated. Validated will turn it on and allow services in ServiceNow to now utilize this MidServer. After your MidServer is validated, the next step is to configure your LDAP and AD connection in ServiceNow. We do need to connect to the same LDAP or AD directory as your Prism Central Calm instance. So under LDAP, I'm going to come to Create New Server. Here I'm going to add my server name, my LDAP URL, and the base search directory of where I'm going to search for my AD users and groups. After I've created my LDAP server, now I need to give it credentials to access the domain. Now you'll notice we add the credentials, the connection is still going to fail. That's because the SaaS off instance does not have access to your internal network. So we stop the listener, and this will allow us to select the MidServer that we created in our prior step. So after we select the MidServer, we can update the AD connection and start the listener back. Now with our proper MidServer selected, we hit test connection and we can see that ServiceNow can now communicate with our Active Directory instance. So now that Active Directory is configured, we want to head over to scheduled loads and execute an import of all the AD groups and users. So if we click on each scheduled job, AD groups import, execute now, this will execute a job in the background to synchronize all your LDAP groups. And we'll do the same with our AD users execute script. Now, if we want to use emails that say, hey, your servers are ready or your build failed, we need to configure an email address to send and a few other properties here. For testing purposes, I usually put in my email address to make sure things are working well.